of causing deforestation by importing stuff. So it's an interesting one. And it's not just rubber. There are other categories as well. I can't remember them all now, but soy, cocoa, coffee, chocolate, meat.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk Series brought to you by AKFI, Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry association committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. My name is Isabella. I am the co-host here with Manuel, another co-host, also the executive director at the AKFI. And today we have our special guest, our old friend to me, uh, Tom, joining us. Good to see you again, Tom.
Thanks, Isabella. Great to see you, and you too, Manuel.
Same here, and also old friend for me as well, Isabella.
Okay. Good, good. Amazing. So thanks to this talk series, we get to bring together great minds like Tom and many others to together discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. Tom is a sustainability and technology professional, podcast host, and keynote speaker with over 25 years of experience in the software industry. He hosts two podcasts. One is called Sustainable Supply Chain, and the other one is called Climate Confident. And that has been going on for years. Very impressive. I knew it since we know each other back then, 2 years ago. And together, these podcasts has generated over 400,000 downloads and have ranked in the top 10 global leaderboards for thought leadership in sustainability, climate, supply chain, IoT, and the energy transition. So if anyone's interested, you know where to find it. It's very easy to find. We'll make sure to post the link as well. And to start our conversation, Tom, can you just tell us and elaborate on the current trends in AI, supply chain integration, and how they're transforming today's industry in general?
Sure, yeah, no problem. So yeah, we've seen, well, AI has been around for the longest time, and AI has been in supply chain as well for quite some time. But of course, when we saw in November 22 the advent of OpenAI and ChatGPT, the launch of it, that changed a lot of things. And I mean, primarily what it did was it brought AI to the to the forefront of people's minds. And so while there were a lot of supply chain organizations or supply chain solution companies who were already building AI into their products, they just weren't making it the primary part of their marketing, for example. Suddenly the marketing slides all changed, and the AI went to the front slide in the deck, rather than might have been 5 or 6 down in the deck. So the solutions now, a lot of the hype around AI we're seeing today and in the last nearly 2 years has been around generative AI. Mm-hmm. And while it has proven to be really impressive in what it's able to do, the other types of AIs, the reinforcement learning, the machine learning, these kind of things have been in the background in supply chain solutions, as I said, for at least a decade, in many cases more. And they're doing impressive things. They're doing things like allowing, there's a company I came across called Ola AI, and they have a solution that allows people to literally talk, or it talks them through in their industry different processes, step by step by step. And as they reply to the AI, it's taking the data in structured format. So it's allowing them to speak to the AI, and that takes the input from them, converts it to structured data, and injects that then into their whether it's SAP or Oracle or whatever ERP system they're using. So things like that can, reduce drastically the amount of time that people are taking to do tasks. It can avoid a lot of things like transcription errors. It can allow multilingualism, because a lot of these generative AI systems, of course, and NLP systems, natural language processing systems, are completely multilingual. It doesn't matter what language you speak to them in. So there are all kinds of things like that. The computer vision AI stuff that's happening is incredible as well. Everything from QC, quality control, to safety systems, monitoring factory floors, making sure people are where they're supposed to be, that they have the right safety equipment on, all these kind of things as well. There's I was speaking to, on today's episode, the episode of the podcast that went live today, I was speaking to a company called Live.io. And what they do is they help companies be compliant with the new EUDR legislation, for example. And for people who are unfamiliar with what EUDR is the EU's deforestry regulation. And the EU's deforestry regulation says that if you are a company based in the EU and you're importing goods from outside the EU, you have to be able to show that the goods you're importing have not caused any deforestation where they were produced since 2020. So you have to be able to go back in time, say where the goods you were importing were produced, and show that the production of those goods didn't cause deforestation. And so what this company Live.io does is it allows companies to do that. It has satellite photography information. It can geolocate that down to individual plots. It can show, whether there was forestry on this land or not, whether there's still forestry on this land or not. If not, when did it go away? All these kind of things. So the use cases for AI in supply chain are absolutely myriad. They're everywhere. Customs forms is another one that companies are working with. These customs declaration forms are very often they're very tedious to fill out. There's a lot of fields in there, and if you're bringing in a big container with lots of things, there can be lots of different forms, and so a lot of that can be automated using AI as well. So taking the filling out of those forms down from days to minutes often. So a lot of it is around making organizations more efficient. A lot of it is around helping compliance with regulations. A lot of it is around safety, and quality control would be another one that they're having big impacts on.
That's amazing. And you brought a very interesting point, because I was used to AI doing translation, right? Speaking any language, as you mentioned. Uh, but I think you move the needle to the next level, where AI actually can talk I don't know, the language of the forms of customs, the language of the uh, databases, the languages of SAP, and so on. So I thought it was very interesting, because it extended as a bridge between machine and humans, right? You can speak
Yeah.
both classes of languages.
Yeah, no, it's hugely important. And because when people sit down and start typing information in, very often, as I mentioned, you can get transcription errors, you can get bad data. But if you're guiding people through the data entry, then you make it easier. You reduce the amount of errors that go in. And then if you're doing that using audio in the person's language, in their own native language, you again make it more efficient, and you again reduce out the amount of errors that could possibly be put in.
Extremely interesting, and I think we will uncover more through the conversation today, and hopefully in the future.
Yeah.
Uh, but one of the things which I would like to emphasize, because of the activities of AKFI, it's also the link between the supply chain AI and, as you mentioned, the now the European regulations, but the regulations are coming out at different speeds in all the world, from China and Singapore to the US. And I don't know if you have some examples ready on how the supply chain has been changed by the sustainability requirements. In particular, what we use, for instance, in AKFI is one simple example of car manufacturers and tire manufacturers. And if you look at the relationship, it's for every tire manufacturer has one to many, major tire manufacturer, one to many supply relationships, which are fill those gaps, as you mentioned, with different requirements and so on. I don't know if you can bring an example from there, and also an example from the supply chain and electricity. I know that your other podcast is very much focused on that, electricity demand, electricity production.
Sure. Well, I mean, on the tire production front, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that podcast that I mentioned about live EO and the EUDR, that's one of the categories of imports that are going to be very heavily impacted by this legislation, the EUDR legislation, because it comes into force January 1st of 2025, so in 3 months' time. And the rubber manufacturers, the likes of the tire manufacturers, they often have tens, hundreds of thousands of rubber suppliers. These can be small subsistence-based farmers who are farming rubber in Southeast Asia, and they can be tens, hundreds of thousands of them that the tire manufacturers are dealing with. And now they have to show that in the case of each and every one of those suppliers, they're not causing deforestation. And so it's a huge, huge challenge. And it's going to be potentially very impactful, because, well, first of all, it's going to stop a significant amount of deforestation, which is fantastic. But the other thing to be aware of is the tire manufacturers. They're going to have to ensure that the data that they're getting is very accurate, because if they're starting to say, we don't think that rubber supplier is causing deforestation, and it turns out they are, they're on the hook for a serious fine. This legislation has got teeth at something like, I think it's similar to GDPR. It's something like 4 or 5% of turnover. That
4% of turnover in Europe.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
up to, right? But,
yeah. So, and you've got the reputational risks going along with it as well. So it's not something you don't want to be found guilty of causing deforestation by importing stuff. So it's an interesting one. And it's not just rubber. There are other categories as well. I can't remember them all now, but soy, cocoa, coffee, chocolate, meat obviously is a big one as well. So beef, you don't want to be causing
oil is
palm oil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of them there. I may have drifted away from your question, Manuel. Could you guide me back again?
Sure. My question was actually the relationship between the car manufacturers, that now they have to this data. So, okay, there is a CSR report or a sustainability report by the tire manufacturer, let's say Michelin in France. But then when they go to the car manufacturers, they have also different requirements in terms of reporting, as you explained earlier. And AI plays a role, because all these requirements of reporting are different, right? Ford maybe wants, I don't know, net zero by 2040. GM may want no child labor, or no people hired under the age of 15, and stuff like that. So each of them have their own sustainability goals. So when you try to align them, you come up with even more complex picture than you already complex.
Yeah, and you're seeing as well that a lot of Customers are now demanding from their suppliers different kinds of reporting around ESG so that they can then say, oh, well, all my suppliers are good because they filled out this kind of form. And so, that doesn't really scale. If you have 10 suppliers, that's fine. But if you have 10,000 suppliers, then it starts to become quite challenging to manage all those. And if you have 10 customers, same story in reverse. If you have 10,000 customers and they're all demanding, they all have their own particular kind of survey that you've got to fill out to show, it starts to become just ridiculously crazy. You just spend all your time, your sustainability team will spend all of their time filling out these reports. So yeah, AI has a big role to play there. But I think as well, cloud delivered platforms are going to play a role there, because if you are dealing with some kind of sustainability cloud platform and reporting all your data to them, very often they then have standardized ways of reporting out to different requirements as they're needed. So that can take some of the burden off. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are headed now, is they're using third-party platforms to help them manage the filling out of all these forms that their customers are demanding.
And of course, and not to dwell into it, there is the issue of traceability and audits, right? So, passing the
Absolutely.
data to the intermediary doesn't, protect you from audits. And what we're actually proposing at AKFI is to create something called the request for sustainable report. So a simple form that it's, if you want, we call standard, but it's a simple form or a simplified form that it's at least shared between all the suppliers and supply chain. So they have an idea of what data they need to report, and in some way standardize the report, the sustainability reporting on the front end and back end. So we definitely, but I think there are many other. So the other question was maybe briefly about electricity production and supply chain and AI. Since I know your podcasts are also very active in that area.
In
So,
which
so the role of AI in sustainability in the supply chain for the electricity production and electricity distribution.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, it's a good one. And again, there are lots of use cases of AI in the energy space. So if you start to think that the production of electricity requires on the grid that the supply and the demand balance each other out, then traditionally that hasn't been a big issue, because traditionally you had variable but predictable demand, and you had supply which was completely controllable, and so it was easy enough to manage that the supply and the demand matched quite well. But now we're getting into a situation where the supply is becoming very variable as well, because as we switch away from the traditional forms of energy generation, from the kind of big thermal plants, to now a lot of distributed renewable energy, where, if you're getting energy from solar farms and a cloud goes over, obviously it'll dip a bit, and so you got a lot more variability on the supply side. And the demand side has always been variable but predictable. So now matching these two is becoming a lot more challenging. A, because of the variability of the supply, but B, because of the amount of generation facilities. I mean, it used to be you'd have 4 or 5 big thermal plants, and now you could have thousands of wind turbines and solar parks, and increasingly battery storage is coming into the system as well. And so managing all of that, the amount of data that each of those generators creates, is mind-blowing and would be impossible for any one team of people to manage. So now this is where AI steps in and starts managing the whole system and making sure that everything kind of balances out properly. And, takes, if there's too much supply, either drop the price to kind of stimulate demand, or maybe tells one of the generators to go offline, or a combination, or start diverting energy into the batteries so they start sucking it in, and then later taking energy from the batteries again when the price starts going up, when people arrive home 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening and start turning on the lights and start cooking and things like that, and the energy starts going up as the sun is going down. So there's all these kind of things that have to be taken into account. And as I said, it's with the amount of data that all these are generating now, it's beyond the scope of any people to be able to manage that properly. So that's where AI is stepping in and helping out. But it's not just even there. I was speaking to a couple of companies in the energy space back the end of last year, start of this year, both two companies, one Siemens and the other NERA, and they're both taking similar approaches. What we're starting to see is that we have to double the size of our energy grids between now and the early 2030s. And so the energy grids that we have today, it's taken us 120, 130, 140, thereabouts years to build them out. And we have to do the same again in the next 5, 6, 7 years. So it's a huge task, but maybe not, because a lot of the grids that are operating today are operating at what seems to be peak capacity, but actually isn't. Because a lot of the distribution systems, they're running electricity through them, but they could run more. What they're doing is that they've safety margins in place to make sure that the lines don't get too hot and potentially cause a fire, and et cetera, et cetera. But when you start to analyze the grids using AI, it turns out that a lot of them are running well under capacity, and you could increase the amount of energy going through them while still staying well within the safety margins. And that way, maybe not have to double the size of the grid, but maybe make it, 150% the size it is today rather than 200%. And that would ease a lot of the roadblocks that are actually there at present in rolling out new renewables. A lot of the challenges with rolling out renewables today are not the likes of getting planning permission or things like that, or doing, environmental impact assessments. It's not that. A lot of it is actually getting cables from the generation to the distribution. And so, and getting substations and things in place to move the energy. It turns out that a lot of that doesn't actually need to be built out. It's actually there already, it's just underutilized.